which well, that kind of got into it already. So this meeting is being recorded. Again, welcome and thank you all for joining us. For those who don't know yet, my name is Nakia Edmond and I'm the Community Impact Coordinator on the Community Impact team here at the Foundation. I'm fortunate to be our staff lead that works in partnership with both the Hispanic Impact Fund and the Women's Fund to ensure our grant making is a success. I'm delighted to have an opportunity to share a bit about this year's grant cycle. We've got a packed agenda today, and I want to make sure that we have enough time to cover everything. So going to go over some highlights and overview for y'all, then leave ample time for answering questions at the end that you may have. This is also being recorded for anyone who may be missing anything or if you need to hop off early, just a reminder. So let's get started by reviewing our agenda for today's webinar. So heads up, here's our agenda for today. I'm going to introduce to you some folks that you will see a few times throughout the grant cycle. We'll start sharing an overview of the Women's Fund and our grant making priorities and what awards are available this year. Then we'll focus on eligibility requirements and we'll dig in a bit deeper to the specifics of this year's application, and proposals will be evaluated and how proposals will be evaluated and grant partners, how they're selected. We'll conclude with FAQs and tips for first-time applicants and open the floor for any additional questions. Now, let me share with you some grant committee leadership for this year. So these two amazing women are both investors in the Women's Fund and go above and beyond by volunteering their time on our Women's Fund Steering Committee. Kavya Nath is our 2024 Grants Committee Chair and Robin Fremont is our Grants Chair-elect. For each of them, the 2024 grant cycle actually began way back a year ago when we reviewed the 2023 process, and they dug into feedback from both our reviewers and you, the applicants. So they poured over different tweaks we could make to things and have put a lot of thoughtfulness into what we're going to share with you today. Additionally, especially since I myself am still a newcomer for ACF and I want to introduce you to some key staff members that will be your partners through this grant process. Again, my name is Nakia Edmond. I'm the Community Impact Coordinator. I joined the foundation this past September, so I was able to see just a tiny bit of the 2023 grant cycle, but I'm so excited to be a part of this process from start to finish. Next is Adi Gonzalez, Program Manager of the Hispanic Impact Fund, who's on the call today. Elizabeth Pena, who's our Director of Community Impact. And lastly, and certainly not least, none of our amazing grant making work will be possible without Sarah Watson. She's our pro at all things grants. She couldn't join the call today, but her contact information is here and will be shared again at the end of the presentation because she's your go-to for all things technical and grants portal related. So GLM, which we'll talk about. And all right, we'll go ahead and start digging in. I'm going to pass it over to Elizabeth, who's on the call, to share some information about Austin Community Foundation.
Hi, yeah, Nakia, thank you so much for getting us started and welcome everybody. I just want to echo Nakia's gratitude that you could all join us today and say we've got a lot of great info for you. But for anyone who's new on today's webinar today, or you're not familiar with the Women's Fund and the Austin Community Foundation, we're going to just back up and give a little bit of background context. So Austin Community Foundation is the nonprofit organization behind this grant making. Our work and our leadership are focused on closing the opportunity gap through advancing economic mobility and housing affordability. So the Women's Fund, as well as the Black Fund and Hispanic Impact Fund, are our signature programs, which are key to that economic mobility portion of our mission. We use data to set our focus and are community-led by working in partnership with volunteer steering committees to set the strategies for each of these signature programs. And you may not know, but ACF also offers services. Our primary service that we offer is working with individuals on the management of their donor advised funds. So if you've ever gotten a donation from someone with a donor advised fund, that might have come from us or from another commercial provider, but that is definitely a big thing we do here at ACF. But lesser known, we also have resources specifically to support the nonprofit community too. So our grant making programs, which I just mentioned, the Black Fund, the Hispanic Impact Fund, and the Women's Fund, are a great example of that grant making, those program grants. Plus, we offer community grants, which is a year-round open application process. Those applications are put in front of our donor advised fund holders to review and potentially fund. And we awarded around $1 million through that opportunity last year. We also offer agency funds. This can be for your organization's endowment or for other complex gift work that you might need support with. And finally, we always make public for free our research reports, which provide localized data that you're welcome to use in your own grant writing or case for support. So that's just a little bit about ACF, and you're welcome to review more information on our website, austincf.org, or email us at heretohelp@austincf.org if you have any specific questions, or if you ever want to take us up on using any of those services. So as many of you already know, and I mentioned earlier, ACF has 3 signature community-led grant-making programs: the Black Fund, the Hispanic Impact Fund, and the Women's Fund. This year, we're pleased to again be offering a joint application for our grant-making programs. However, you'll notice that at this time, just the Hispanic Impact Fund and the Women's Fund will be requesting proposals. We mentioned this earlier in emails, but since its launch in late 2022, the Black Fund has already awarded $855,000 to 46 Black-led and Black-serving organizations in Central Texas. The Black Fund Steering Committee has decided that they're going to pause grant making at this time to just reflect, listen, and learn from the community and ensure that the theory of change still meets the needs of Black Central Texans. So their work is by no means done. They're just taking a pause from grant making for this cycle, and the Hispanic Impact Fund and the Women's Fund will be granting together. You can read more in a statement from the Black Fund leadership on ACF's website, which I know we linked to in our previous emails. And this means for the 2024 cycle, we will award 31 grants totaling $1 million through these 2 specific programs. So $500,000 from the Women's Fund and $500,000 from Hispanic Impact Fund. We heard your feedback that the joint application process made things a lot simpler for your organization. So we hope that doing it again this year just continues to streamline our partnership. All right, so now we're excited to give you a closer look at the strategies and an overview of the Women's Fund. Take it away, Nakia.
Awesome, thank you. So as you may know, the Women's Fund was founded in 2004 to focus on the needs of women and children in Central Texas. At the time, there was a lack of philanthropic support targeting the unique needs of women. Given our giving was less, so grants tended to be about 5,000 to 15,000 range at most, and it was challenging to provide feedback to applicants without us having a more focused strategy. So in 2016, leadership at the foundation recognized that the Women's Fund could be, and still is today, a key strategy at ACF to close the opportunity gap. As such, the Women's Fund's commitment to focusing on supporting the economic security of women and also recognizing that our focus on the economic security of women must be explicit in its focus on women of color in particular. In our impact areas, there are targets for how we narrow in on supporting economic security. Those are childcare, education, housing, unattended pregnancy prevention, and women's health, specifically tackling health disparities faced by women of color. So the bubbles on the right reflect where the Women's Fund's currently in the strategy's evolution. We're using data from nonprofit leaders' input, community input, and investor input to piece together how we do this work together. Thanks to everyone who has shared feedback, given their time, et cetera, to help us iterate and continue to improve this process. Very much well appreciated and thanked. Now let's talk in a little bit more detail about the strategy areas for this year's grants. So we're going to dive into each of the strategy statements to help you get a better understanding of what you're looking at in the grant, what we're looking for, and a grant partner's work within each area. So this year we want to make sure to specifically call out that, again, we're offering unrestricted grants, And we're also willing to support both organizations providing direct service and those that are working at the systems level. That's been the case for the last few years, but this year we want to just really highlight it for potential applicants. So the Women's Fund will be making grants in 5 different areas. For those of you that have applied in the past, you'll see that things haven't changed. And this year, the Women's Fund will be investing in programs and organizations that, in detail, in our child care strategy, we hope to expand access to safety, quality, culturally competent, and affordable care that is conveniently located for families with low incomes. We want to provide access to economic ecosystem of support, academic, emotional, and for women pursuing educational dreams, supporting access to affordable housing for women that includes a network of support and or opportunities for long-term wealth building. For unintended pregnancy prevention, we're looking to increase access to consumable, unbiased pregnancy prevention resources. And in women's health, we're focusing on tackling health disparities faced by women of color. We also offer guiding definitions documents, which can help you drill down into the specifics of each of these strategies and better determine where your organization has the most alignment. So the ACF team will go ahead and drop a link in the chat to that resource in the chat, but now it's also available on the Women's Fund's grant page if you need it later. You can't get to it now. I highly recommend if you get familiar with the strategy statements and guiding definitions, just because these serve as our committee's North Star when reviewing the process or the proposals. Okay, so let's shift to some extra fun stuff and discuss award amounts. So this year we're awarding a total of $500,000 in unrestricted operating support, which will be granted to 15 different organizations. In each strategy area, 3 grants will be distributed as follows. One winning finalist receives $55,000 in total, a multi-year grant over 2 years. So that'll be $35,000 this year and $20,000 next year. One runner-up finalist will receive $30,000 this year. And the last one, which is semifinalist, will receive $15,000 this year. So here you can see the full picture of where the $500,000 will go. We'll have 3 grantees across our 5 strategy areas. This is the same amount of grants given out last year and continues to be the best practice, providing general operating support. Continuing with having at least 1 multi-year fund opportunity in each strategy area and offering a larger amount of awards for semifinalists. All right, so how is this going to happen, you may ask? Who's eligible to apply for the Women's Fund grant? Elizabeth's going to share some details about this now.
Yeah, so great question. So in general, the Women's Fund eligibility guidelines really follow the same guidelines as other grant making programs here at the foundation. This means you need to be a tax exempt organization or unit of government doing work in the 6 county service territory that we cover here in Central Texas. So that's Bastrop, Burnett, Caldwell, Hays, Travis, and Williamson counties. We will fund fiscally sponsored projects, but in general, we don't make grants to endowment funds, religious organizations for religious purposes, fundraising or events, political lobbying, or legislative activities, and we cannot grant to individuals. So a few additional eligibility considerations. We will consider proposals that engage in non-lobbying advocacy work. We recognize that in order to engage in systemic change, advocacy is really critical to increasing access to services in many of the areas that we aim to reach. Agencies engaged in educating the public about issues, doing community organizing, policy research, or other non-lobbying advocacy activities may certainly apply and are eligible to receive funds. You don't have to engage in that work, just know that it won't preclude you from applying or receiving a grant. So proposals will also be considered from religious organizations that have non-religious affiliated programming. If you're a religious organization and you choose to apply, make sure that you demonstrate in your application that your work aligns with the strategies and is 1, secular in nature, and 2, does not discriminate against any constituents or clients based on religion. And then finally, a note about past grantees. You are eligible to apply, though you'll want to make sure that your progress reports for any most recent awards have already been submitted. So you can't have any sort of outstanding reporting if you're a past grantee for program grants. And one exception is if you are an organization who received a multi-year grant in a previous grant cycle, you're not eligible to reapply under the same strategy for which you're still being awarded funds. So if you can't remember, you're a 2023 grantee, you don't remember what strategy you applied for, we do have the information on our website, but we're also going to make sure to reach out to past grantees so that they know what they are and aren't eligible to apply for. You can apply in a different strategy area. You just can't receive funding for one that you're still getting a multi-year payout for. And then this might go without saying, but we just want to make sure to say the reminder, the Women's Fund operates independently of other grant making programs. So if you are going to apply for a community grant or you've received a community grant, or if you want to apply for both the Women's Fund and the Hispanic Impact Fund, that's completely fine. You can apply for all of those and you can receive funding from all of them. One doesn't knock you out of the running for the other. All right, so now Nakia is going to dig into this year's application and review process to give you some more information. Quickly, I wanted to just remind everyone, if you could use the Q&A function, that will help us make sure that each of your questions is answered promptly, and we can make sure that at the end we'll recap some of them out loud for the whole group. I just don't want to lose them in the chat. So grateful that y'all have some really good questions, but if you don't mind plugging those into the Q&A, that will help us make sure that we get to all of them. Sorry, go ahead, Nakia.
No problem. So as you can see here, the full review process takes a little over 3 months. We know that this is a unique grant making process, and as such is more time intensive. So we'll go in depth on each of these steps, but I want to share why we believe in this grant making process and specifically for our program funds. As you'll hear, applications are scored, reviewed by community members who are philanthropically minded, excuse me, and eager to learn about organizations like yours. So last year, when the grant cycle concluded, we surveyed grants committee participants. 100% of those surveys reported that they learned a lot from new organizations. They also reported that their desire to volunteer and donate with organizations based on their participation in the grant cycle was really high. And I say this because I know that your time is valuable and grant applications take a lot of time out of your day. So our main goal is to support organizations with crucial funding dollars. Along with that, we're proud to continue to grow and provide opportunities for committee members to not only learn about the issues facing women today and how your work can address them and are addressing them, but also how can they support this work outside of the grant cycle. So let's get started with requests for proposals. So our grant cycle opened last week on May 31st, so it's already live, and for you early birds that want to check this off your to-do list sooner rather than later, you are highly recommended to. You'll need to get those applications in again by the end of next month by 5 p.m. on July 31st. In order to submit your application, you will need to log into your account in the ACF Grants portal to submit the application. If you are a first-time applicant, you'll need to create a login. There's a link to our ACF Grants portal on the Women's Fund RFP page, and it will also be shared in the chat now, just so you have that reference on hand. So before we jump into the application, I wanted to share a few tips to use when working on your application. We know that this can be a lot for organizations who may consider applying for more than one, so I highly recommend and encourage you that you draft your application. Please reference the scoring rubric, your strategy statements and guiding definitions, the guiding principles document in case the scoring rubric, in case you're doing the scoring rubric, you'll directly see how it ties back to the application and the number of points that each organization can be awarded for each question in each category. New this year, the guiding principles were created by the Women's Fund Steering Committee as an additional reference to use once grants committee members and at the semifinalist selection stage. So the guiding definitions, are really meant to help provide some clarity and context to the Women's Fund strategies. Some of the terms and the strategies can be interpreted differently, and they provide some clarity on what we mean by culturally competent and quality healthcare, et cetera. These are really helpful in terms of understanding how your application will be evaluated. These can be found on the grants making page of our website for you to download. And again, we'll drop this in the chat. And probably the most important resource is the scoring rubric, so we'll get to that. So discussing the scoring rubric, the rubric is comprised of 2 different sections that together total 100 points. These sections are diversity and representation worth 35 points and proposed work and impact narrative worth 65 points total. So going forward in the application, once you create an account and log in, there are several different sections to the application. And these will be the ones that you see. So you can see those sections here. We'll also be providing a link to a Word document version of the application questions in the chat in case you want to work on your proposal outside of the portal and plug in your responses later. This is great for collaborative purposes, just in case there are different people in your organization that are contributing. And as I've mentioned, this year's grant cycle for both the Women's Fund and Hispanic Impact Fund are happening at once. So to help aid in this process, we've created one application. So you decide to apply for more than one program fund, you can have the option to submit one application that includes applications for both Hispanic Impact Fund and the Women's Fund. So, and that'll be the last that we'll talk about soon, which is the learning sessions. So we can get started. First, you'll confirm your eligibility and enter some basic contact information. Here's what the eligibility section would look like. Once you review the grants process information and eligibility requirements, which will have a review for you to use, well, for you since you're learning about all of this on today's webinar, you'll just select yes. That you're eligible in order to move forward with the organization information. And that's what that would look like on that page. All right, so next you'll enter that in the general organization information, including your organization's name, incorporation date, and mission statement. Again, if you are applying for both funds, you'll only need to fill this out once, so that saves you a lot of time. So up next is diversity and representation section of the application. For this section, there are charts we're asking you to fill out with your organization's data. Here are the instructions that you'll see, and I'll show you what the charts look like in just a moment. So one key thing to remember is we're collecting this data regardless of which program you're applying for. However, how this information is scored and used to make decisions throughout the rest of the process will vary by the program fund. So be sure to reference that scoring rubric in order to make sure that everything lines up correctly. So here's what those charts look like. You'll be asked to fill out data for the following members of your organization. It'll be board members, executive staff, and remaining or non-executive staff. Please make note, we ask for the breakout of executive staff and non-executive staff. So be sure not to double count staff here. And finally, people served. We're looking for whole numbers here, not percentages. If the number is 0, please type that in. Similarly, if you do not know or don't collect this information, please still have the number of individuals reflected in the unknown box. So right there. So the number at the bottom of each chart next to total should equal the total number of individuals from the category. So the final required question of the section asks the percentage of those who you project to serve who are at or below 200% of the federal poverty line. And for a family of 4 in 2024, this is an annual income of $62,400. If you don't know this information, please put your best estimated percentage. So hopefully this is clear by now that our grant making seeks to fund organizations that reflect people they serve. What we also know is that organization values and intentions can't always be seen through raw numbers. And the final two questions in the diversity and representation section allow organizations to expand upon the information you provided. First, if you are unable to report on any of the demographics requested, you can explain why. Last, you have the opportunity to add context to the data you shared. For example, you could share successes and challenges related to your organization's diversity and representation. Okay, so you verified you're eligible. You filled out some standard organization information and you've completed your diversity representation charts. It's time for the assurance checklist. So these are some quick yes and no questions about your organization. Again, this is standard regardless of whichever program you're applying to. Now in this section, you'll have the opportunity to upload your attachments. We only ask for a copy of your IRS letter and the letters for your fiscal sponsor and operating budget. So the budget can also be something your organization is already using, or you're welcome to borrow our template and create a budget to upload to the application, which is right here. Okay, so the last and potentially most important step in this section is selecting which program or programs you're applying to. You'll check all that applies. So in this example, we're just applying to the Women's Fund. So once you check the box, the corresponding narrative sections will populate for you to complete. And it'll look like this. So new last year is the gender identity box, which breaks out in the same category. This will be considered when scoring for the client served portion specifically. You're welcome to fill this out however people self-identify. These totals are expected to be the same as the total provided in the first chart. So remember looking at the rubric if you have questions about how Women's Fund will be scoring and interpreting this information. This is a great way to see it. So the narrative section has a few different parts. So first, you'll select which strategy you're applying to. You can always choose one. If you want to apply to multiple strategies for the Women's Fund, you need to complete an additional application for each separate strategy area. But remember that you can only receive an award in one category. If you do choose to submit multiple applications in different strategies, you'll only be able to advance to the semifinalist round. More on that later. And we'll determine which one during the scoring and semifinalist selection phase of the process. So if you, excuse me. So once you've selected the strategy area you're focused on, you'll have then a space to address in detail how your work aligns with the selected strategy. Then you'll continue with the process, proposed work, and impact section by addressing the need you're meeting. So your approach, articulate how you evaluate yourself for success, highlight your history working with the target population. You also ask about any systems level impact your organization participates in. This is for committees' own education. We're not scoring the information, simply curious to learn about the work that your organizations are doing in the space so we can see any kind of themes and look for opportunities for us to better support this type of work. In the future, the questions are not scored, so please do not worry. And just to give you a little context, not scored. All right, so we're moving on to the last part of the narrative section. This is a brief description. This needs to be about your organization, but not include any identifying information. If your application advances to the finalist round, this will be used for the voting process. We'll also ask you to click out of the portal and submit your availability for virtual learning sessions. This must be submitted before your application is considered complete for us. We also recommend holding the dates you selected on your calendar internally now to help you ease the scheduling process later. These two sections are also not scored. It's just to help move the process along more smoothly and reduce the number of times we have to come back to you to ask for additional information. So now we're on to the next portion. If you feel a big weight being lifted off your shoulders, that's because the hardest part is done. At this point in the process, your application is in and it's our turn to get to work. So time for scoring. So first, who reviews your application? Staff will do an initial review to confirm eligibility. Grants committee members will score your application. These are Women's Fund investors and then community reviewers. Community reviewers are members of the community that have lived experience and represent the communities served by Women's Fund grants. And community reviewers also provide a stipend for scoring applications. All grants committee members must participate in an unconscious bias training offered by ACF and disclose any conflict of interest. If your application cannot be reviewed by anyone that has a relationship with your organization, donor, board member, client, etc., one thing to note is that the review committees do not change each year. It's a great mix of returning members and folks who are brand new to the process. So as mentioned, all scores will be using the rubric on the Women's Fund RFP webpage. That's also being shared in the chat, which includes an equity lens. The rubric directly ties back to each question in the application, so you can see exactly how you'll be scored. The rubrics prioritize diversity and representation throughout your organization. That means staff, board, and of course, clients. So be sure to review this while creating your application. Your reviewers will be grouped into subcommittees that are assigned all the applications from a particular strategy area. So childcare subcommittees will review all childcare applications. They will also use strategy statements, guiding definitions repeatedly during the process to make decisions. So now reviews are complete and the scores are in. What's next? So using the scores from both grants committee members and community reviewers, the grants committees come together to make decisions and confirmations about organizations that will move forward as semifinalists and be 2024 Women's Fund grant partners. So 3 organizations from each strategy area will move forward and are guaranteed at least $15,000 in funding. So you can expect to hear from us at this point in early October. If you don't move forward to semifinalists, you receive a declination letter. We request feedback about your experience with the application process. You'll be given the opportunity to sign up for feedback sessions. If your organization is selected as a semifinalist, we'll reach out to you to let you know you're moving forward. We may request some additional information set CH form for sending grant funds and some marketing materials that can include official logos, social media handles, etc., to celebrate. And also to schedule virtual learning sessions with you based on the availability you provided in your application. So you got the email, congrats, you're a semifinalist. Next is virtual learning sessions. So all semifinalists are then asked at this point to attend a virtual learning session with members of the grants committee. These are 45-minute sessions that are an opportunity for Women's Fund investors to meet with you and your team. We don't stipulate who from your team should be on the call, which we found to be helpful to members of your executive leadership, programming team, and someone who can speak to your application. We recommend these people, but we require no more than 3 individuals to join the call. So foundation staff will coordinate the timing and send questions ahead of the meeting so you're not caught off guard. And we'll also ask 3 to 4 questions that will allow you to expand on your work. You'll also receive these questions well beforehand, so please do not fret. And if you have any questions for the Women's Fund, we encourage you to send those in advance as well so they can be prepared as well. So virtual learning sessions are complete and it's time for the grants committee members to come again and decide. So 2 organizations from each strategy area will move forward as finalists and move on to the voting stage. If you're still with me, we'll now have 10 finalists in total. So you can expect to hear from us at this point in mid-November. If you didn't move forward to finalist selections, you'll receive a semi-finalist award letter. We'll request feedback about your experience in the application process, and you'll get the opportunity to sign up for feedback sessions. If your organization is selected as a finalist, we'll reach out to you to let you know you're moving forward to the last stage. And the brief description that you provided in your application will be used for blind voting to determine the top award recipient. Now it's time for the final vote. So voting takes place online and over the course of a week. Like last year, voting is open to all women's fund investors and community reviewers. So voting will also be done without any identifying information to curb implicit bias. Investors and community reviewers will vote based on the description included in your application and will not be notified of your organization's name. So it'll be completely blank. So these votes will determine the final funding amount, and winning finalists from each strategy area will receive $55,000, and runner-up finalists from each strategy area will receive $30,000. All right, so we've made it a long way and the voting is finished. So now what? So you can expect to hear final funding amounts on December 2nd. We'll be giving out grant agreements to sign and for you to return to us. We'll request feedback about your participation in the application process again. And finalists will then be asked to join us at our grants celebration on December 6th. All right. So next we're going to have some information about our, excuse me, additional resource that we're offering this year. So it was a lot of information that we just covered, but before we get to FAQs and tips, I'm excited to share that this year we've contracted with a third-party grant consultant who will be available for one-on-one sessions with applicants. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Priscilla Hale. She's an organizational development consultant supporting nonprofits focused on arts, culture, and social justice. She's an organizer with Communities of Color United for Racial Justice in Austin, Texas, and is formerly the executive director of ALGO, a queer people of color organization based in Austin, Texas as well. She was with the organization for 24 years. Hale has extensive experience in the area of community organizing, health and wellness programming, cultural work production, and nonprofit administration. So she's a Black queer lover and producer of the arts. She loves oceans, rivers, lakes, and relishing in the time that she's basked in them and have grown around them. She's earned her master's of social work degree from Our Lady of the Lake University in San Antonio and a bachelor's degree in social work from St. Edward's University in Austin, Texas. So, how to utilize her services. This additional resource is open and optional to all applicants. However, it's intended to provide support for first-time applicants and organizations who don't have access to a grant writer or have limited experience writing grants. So we want to provide this service because this is from feedback sessions. This would be very helpful for especially smaller organizations who will require this service and provide them a little bit of elevation on their workload. So to access the technical writing assistance, we ask that applicants first draft a version of their proposal in the editable Word doc located on our website, and also it was dropped in the chat. Next, you can access her Calendly link here, and we can also provide that in the chat as well to schedule a virtual appointment with her. We ask that you please submit your drafted application to her before your scheduled meeting to receive the best feedback and suggestions to make effective use of the time, but also to get more in depth in the appointment. Okay. So now we're going to give it over to Priscilla.
So hello, I'm here, but my video is enabled.
No problem. Priscilla, you still there with us?
Yes, it's telling me that the host has enabled my ability to show my video.
Let me change that for you. One moment.
Oh,
there you are.
Okay. So hello, so happy to be here to work with Austin Community Foundation on providing some consulting for you folks who are going to be applying. And so just want to give a few tips on some best practices for your grant writing. As you know, it was the RFP was opened on the 31st. So some of you may have already checked that out. Some of you may have not. As somebody who was an executive director, I know that there are times when you're not really thinking of it right now. You're just right in the information stages. So, you know, I would encourage everyone to review the RFP and the questions in the portal as soon as possible so that you can recognize and know what info is needed and from who. Also, the writing process, even when you're looking and reading over those questions, you may not be coming up with the answers there. But what we know is that is also part of the writing process because it takes you into thinking about the overall application, even though you're not really there. And so I have found that can be really helpful. It also gives you a sense of the questions, how many there are, and what is the depth of those questions that can help you then prepare for a timeline, which I really encourage folks to prepare a timeline. I know many of you have written grants in the past, are extensive grant writers, but what I also know is that usually is not folks' only job that they're working on or the only project. And there are also many of you who don't have a whole team of grant writers. Like you are the grant writer, you are the executive director, you are the project person, you are everything. And so with our busy schedules, you know, we often can lose track of the time around the process. And so just kind of try to create a timeline so that can help you make the process run smoother. It also gives time for other folks to look over it. So whether you utilize my services that are being offered, or if you just want your colleagues that are in your office or anybody that you're working with to look it over. One thing I always like to say is it's great to have somebody look over something that to look it over who is not so close to it. People who are closer to it, you may have talked to them already. And so I remember when I used to look at grants, when I was not a grant writer at the organization I was with, they would have me look over them, which is a part of grant writing, which now I claim. But I would be like, I don't understand this. What does this mean? How is this going to work? Like, it's not clear to me. And so that is something that could also be really helpful to help folks. And also in that timeline, you know, prepare for the mishaps, the technology, the electricity's gone out, all of those things. So consider that in your timeline so that you can ensure that you hit that submit button in a timely manner to get these funds that you really are working hard to get. And then just make sure the next thing is answer the questions, be concise and clear. Sometimes folks have applied for these particular funds in the past, and maybe you've gotten feedback from it and maybe you haven't. But if you've gotten feedback, one of the things that having a community process does is it can skew a little bit around what folks are looking for, even though Austin Community Foundation has given guidelines around what they're looking for. People's individual ways still and thinking and how they like to see things still often come into play. And as somebody who has been a grant reviewer as well, it is something that you have to really work hard on, but also it just changes. You might have somebody who's really into budgets on one moment, who's reviewing, who's a grant reviewer, and then somebody who's really into, well, tell me about the program, tell me about the people. And so they could weigh things differently. And Austin Community Foundation is doing a lot to ensure that things are on a level playing field. However, people are human, and those things play into how people review and score things. So utilize that rubric score. Make sure you're answering the questions clearly and concisely. And, you know, oftentimes it's better to have less words than more words so that there's no ambiguity in what you're actually trying to get across. And they, you know, they provided, you know, strategy statement and questions. And so I would say definitely make sure that when you are thinking about your project, your program, that you are considering those and that they are in best aligned for the project. And so then just getting feedback on the proposals. Again, I already mentioned that around colleagues and my availability. And then lastly, just review again before you hit that final submission, just to make sure that you didn't start on something and forget to go back and ask the question and in order to clarify, make sure there's no missing documents. We all get very nervous when it's time to hit that submit button because it's like, this is it, this is that moment. Did I do it? And so as somebody who has been shaking in the moment, so hit the button, I definitely understand that. And so that's what I have to offer now. And so those are tips, just some quick tips around grant writing. And we have an opportunity for questions, but you all have been given and will have access to me. I am asking that folks give me, if you reach out to me for support, that 48 hours in advance would be great to allow me to be able to for me to receive your draft. Or if you have some questions that you would like, because it could not be that you're at the final stages, it could be at the beginning stages. And so I've made myself a little more available than we had talked about in my consulting thing. So just know that, and I wish everyone well and the best in obtaining these funds.
Awesome, thank you, Priscilla. Awesome, so let's get to some of the FAQs and tips. So can you apply to the Hispanic Impact Fund as well as the Women's Fund? The answer is, of course, yes. So eligible organizations are welcome to apply to the Hispanic Impact Fund as well as the Women's Fund. We recommend reviewing both program requirements and timelines to ensure your organization has the capacity to participate in 2 grant cycles. So be sure to keep in mind the eligibility for 2023 grantees that were discussed earlier, because there are a few on the call as well. So next question, we covered a lot of what happens if your organization proceeds in the process, but what if it doesn't? So at the beginning of October, you'll hear from the foundation on whether your application has been funded or is moving to the finalist, semifinalist selection, or if your application has been declined. So please understand that we get a lot of very worthy and meaningful applications, but due to our limited resources, it's hard to fund everyone. So last year, Women's Fund received 96 applications and awarded 15 grants. So you're all great organizations and doing amazing work, and that creates an incredible competitive process. But at the end of the cycle, we have to choose finalists. Some just are a better fit with the strategy statements and approach of the review committee than others. We want to make sure that grants processes is transparent as possible. So if your application is declined, please feel free to email us to express interest in feedback sessions. During these conversations, we'll be able to get information to you from sharing your scores so that you can get a sense of the area where you scored high, where you scored low, and if the committee had any specific feedback that you can improve on. We'll also be sharing all of this as well. So this question is a great one, and unfortunately there isn't a perfect answer. So bottom line, if you're eligible and have the capacity, apply. Be sure to consider the overall application. We share the scoring rubric for a reason. Using that when creating your application will help give you a sense of where your organization's strengths and weaknesses may be during the review process. So last year, the average representation score among our 15 grantees was 30 out of 35 total possible points. So 53% of organizations who became grant partners last year had never received a Women's Fund grant before, so they were first-time grantees. And we had about 50 grants committee members at a minimum, so you can be sure your mission is getting in front of the group of people, regardless if you ended up being funded anecdotally. And thanks to a survey we did last year, we know that committee members ended up being involved in organizations later on just because they learned about them during the participation of the review opportunity. So, do we have tips for first-time applicants? Sure. So, we've already covered a lot in the webinar, but here are just a few tips that we tend to see really helping first-time applicants. Another reminder about reviewing all of the guidelines, scoring rubrics, and definitions. Again, we can't recommend this enough. This tip is really important. Like I mentioned earlier, there are a lot going on for folks reading the application. As you write, please keep in mind your audience is very broad and will have diverse array of lived experience, beliefs, cultures, and expertise, depending on where they're from. So take care to avoid industry specific jargon or acronyms and give the needed context. Going back to Priscilla's way of answering the question. So one way to check for that is to have someone not familiar with your program or organization read the application and ask them if they have questions or if anything is unclear. If they do, it's likely our application scores will too. So also a reminder that new and also a reminder that new this year, we have a grants consultant available, Priscilla, which you've met. Our staff is always here too. So we are available, Elizabeth, Adi, and myself, as well as Sarah, but we can do so much more to help ease your time with the application process by answering general questions, which we'll get to later. We also recommend submitting earlier than the deadline if you can, so we can help you with any last minute questions or issues and avoid those. So I'll pass it off to Elizabeth to facilitate any questions coming in.
Yeah, we've gotten a lot of really great questions so far. So I just want to say, if you've done this in the past, you know that right after the slides for Q&A, I'll also be sharing a link to where you can sign up for office hours with Nakia. So this time of Q&A is really for if you've got a question that you think is applicable to the whole group, it's something about a piece of information we've shared that you want to clarify. I'm happy to address that now for everyone. Know that we'll have an opportunity. If you have questions specific to your organization's circumstances, we can address those things in an office hours appointment with you after the webinar. Okay, so just a couple of questions that have already come up. Can we submit multiple applications to the Women's Fund? So yes, you can apply in multiple strategy areas if you would like to. However, your application can only move forward, or your organization, excuse me, can only move forward to the semifinalist round in one. So if you apply in both education and childcare, once we go to choose semifinalists, if you were selected for both of those by the committees, you would only move forward in the one where you scored the highest. So if your higher score was in childcare, you would move forward in that one. We'll be giving out 15 awards total for the Women's Fund, so 3 awards in each strategy area. So 3 awards for childcare, 3 awards for education, 3 for housing, 3 for unintended pregnancy prevention, and 3 for women's health. Another question was about how to categorize volunteers or contractors in your demographics that you're providing at the very beginning of the application. That is a great question. We know that that demographics section can be stressful. You don't collect certain information. You're not collecting it in the way that we're asking it. You're volunteer run and don't have paid staff, but you do have people working on your programs. If you have a circumstance that you feel like is super unique, reach out to our organization and we're happy to help you, or reach out to our team and we are happy to help your organization with how to navigate that demographics section. I would say contractors can absolutely be included as paid staff. These are general operating support grants. So if the people you're plugging into that demographic section are a core part of your ability to meet your mission, I would include them there. Again, if you're an all volunteer run organization, you can provide information for those folks as staff. You will just want to use that narrative section to really help us understand the numbers that you have plugged in and the nuances that go along with what it is that we're looking at whenever we are reviewing what you've provided. Know that if you put zeros there, we will, because you don't have a certain type, like you don't have paid staff, we will make sure that your scores are weighted appropriately for the information you did have available to provide. And we'll make sure that the reviewers who are looking at scores later to make decisions also are aware of the circumstances and sort of the narrative around what you provided for those demographics. So do the best you can, reach out with questions that you have. We're happy to try and help walk you through those things. Another question we got was around in the brief description. So you make it all the way to the voting stage. You're going to be one of the top 2 grantees. We will use your brief description that you provide in your application, and we asked you to provide no identifying information. So we would consider identifying information anything that makes your statement a giveaway that it's your organization. So obviously your name or reference to, you know, a well-known employee or a reference to the name of a program that you operate. For example, if I can tell your the food bank because you wrote about your mobile pantry program in your brief description, we're going to send that back to you and make you edit it out. So try to do your best to articulate what you do without that identifying information. And if you make it to that stage and we are reviewing your brief description and we see something there that looks off, we will be in communication with you about making edits to that before it goes to the voting stage. Wanted to make a note about feedback. We will request of you and also feedback sessions. So there's 2 different layers there. If you are declined and you don't receive a grant, or if you receive a grant and you just have questions, we will be asking everyone who applies to fill out a survey to help us iterate on this process and make it better in the future. We really take your feedback to heart. We use it over and over again during planning for the next year's grant cycle. And we also offer up the opportunity for you to get feedback from us. So we, at the end of the grant cycle in December, so you might hear that you were declined in October. In December, at the end of the grant cycle, you can sign up for a time to have a one-on-one appointment with us, and we will give you feedback on your application and share any of the information we know about what made applications successful and move forward. So an organization got a grant and why your particular application might not have been selected. We are happy to share that feedback information. And then one note on Priscilla's support. We're so grateful and excited to be offering her help as a resource this year. She mentioned she's reviewed the grants before, she's submitted grants before, and this is a community-led process. So getting help from Priscilla does not guarantee any sort of leg up in the process or any sort of guarantee of funding. We hope you'll use her support, but we just want to make sure to set the expectation that it's there to be a resource and not necessarily something that is going to make you a shoo-in. We also got a question about reporting. If you become a grantee before you sign your grant agreement, you will know exactly what your reporting expectations for the grant are going to be. Historically, we have been trying every year to make those reports simpler and simpler. We obviously have our own metrics that we need to track in order to provide to our own funders or to be able to share out about the impact of this program. But we do try to streamline them as much as possible and make it easy. But you'll know that at the time of signing your grant agreement. Do we have any other questions? All right. Well, on the next slide, you'll see we're hosting those office hours again. You can sign up here to meet with Nakia during office hours from June 24th through June 28th. They're 20-minute sessions. Please know that these are always in high demand, and so we hope that you'll only sign up for one session per organization. If you're applying for the Women's Fund and the Hispanic Impact Fund, you'll sign up for one session, and Nakia can cover your questions that are unique to your organization all in that one appointment. And if for whatever reason she can't answer them live on that, she will make sure to follow up with you afterwards. But we just ask, in the interest of being able to offer this to as many organizations as possible, that you just reserve one slot and make sure to show up and take advantage of that opportunity to ask questions. And we will provide the link so that you can click it in the chat too, so that you can sign up for those office hours now if you already know you're going to have a question. All right, Nakia, I'll pass it back to you to close us out.
Awesome. So as you're drafting your applications, please feel free to reach out to staff with any questions you may have. I've included a slide with your go-tos for this information and also this assistance, as well as type any questions you have for each member of our team to receive any answers you may are looking for. Please feel free to count on Sarah Watson, our grants manager, and myself, just because we're your first go-to people that can get your answers available to you as soon as possible. Have a great rest of your day, and thank you so much for joining us. Please stick around if you need to, or if you need to hop off. Thank you so much.